Our journey had only just begun, and already I was having my doubts. Azure, our leader, insisted upon heading our party, a decision I advised against, recommending he allow our warriors to stand at the front lines while he remained safely behind them to cast magic and provide tactical support. Alas, he was hearing none of it, and placed himself in harm's way rather than allowing our companions to protect him, despite his vulnerability compared to the far superior equipment and endurance of the others. These questionable leadership skills were further brought to my attention when he decided to arm Roach with a hammer, giving our warrior a more cumbersome weapon to wield than the lighter rapier, a blade with superior accuracy and identical offensive power. Nonetheless, we triumphed in our raid of Chaos Shrine, defeating the disgraced Knight Garland and rescuing Princess Sarah. As a reward, the king constructed a bridge, granting us passage to the northern continent. Thus our journey to restore the light to the four crystals begins. Heading north from Cornelia, our first stop was the cave of an elderly woman named Matoya, where we learned of a missing crystal eye, and were taught of a magic spell for summoning forth a map of our world. From there we headed northeast to the port town of Provoca in the hopes of gaining seaward passage to the city of the elves. Much to our surprise, the town was overrun by a crew of pirates led by the notorious Bicky. After heroically knocking down his mates, the pirate captain had a change of heart, and as a token of that gave us his miniature ship, small enough to hold in the palm of our hand. Fortunately, the scale of everything in the world changes when we're outside of towns and caves, and likewise the size of the ship grew substantially from the moment we wandered beyond the city limits. We set sail and arrived in Elfheim. After paying respects to a fallen hero, we headed to the castle and learned of the prince's plight. Thus begins a new leg of our journey, finding a cure for the curse cast upon the Prince of Elfheim by the dark elf Astos. After spending a couple days freeing the seas from pirates and collecting their bounties, we ventured forth to a nearby keep which had fallen into disarray. The king there explained how he had succumbed to the evil doings of dark elf Astos, and claimed he could undo the damage with a magical crown hidden away in the marsh cave to the south. We braved the cave and retrieved the crown among other valuable treasures, but just as we were about to leave, our raving leader jeopardized our lives to appease the unknown entity he's been raveling at since our journey began. Until now, his senseless banter had been harmless, and thus ignored, but today it nearly got me killed when he sought to appease the curiosity of this alleged entity by deliberately directing the group back into the Pisco demon nest as a demonstration. I only pray this won't become a theme as we venture into more dangerous territory. Alas, we had been played for fools, for the king of the Western Keep was in fact Astos in disguise, who wished to use the crown and crystal eye to become the absolute ruler of the elves. Fortunately, thanks to him hiring us to retrieve the crown instead of exploring the cave himself, we managed to thwart his plan following a difficult battle. With Matoya's crystal eye recovered, we returned that in exchange for a tonic, which we used to awaken the elven prince from his 5-year slumber. Having acquired a mystic key, our day began with treasure hunting, revisiting all the places we've been to unlock doors that our leader strangely knew existed in advance. For any shortcomings he may have, Azure seems to have an astonishingly attuned prescience, which will assuredly prove useful throughout our adventure. Thanks to that ability, we managed to find every door in the region which we could unlock with our new key. Within these many chests we found loads of money, new weapons for the entire group, and even some explosive powder. With nowhere else to go, we set sail for the lake's final dock to the northwest. Along the voyage, we defended our vessel from ferocious Sahagins and bloodthirsty sharks, and Azure whipped out an intriguing puzzle of numbered blocks. I have no idea where he got it, but thankfully it didn't turn into a distraction for very long. He insisted it was too difficult to play efficiently while talking, but when I logically suggested he quietly concentrate while the rest of us steer the ship and watch for monsters, he insisted he must resume the commentary. Baffled by the meaning of this, I inquired further, but he simply disregarded my question and proposed we must move on with our quest. pocketing the puzzle and taking the helm while resuming his incessant talking, as if speaking to the sea or sky themselves. We discovered a cave occupied by dwarves and handed over the nitro powder to a man named Nerek, who used the explosive materials to blow open the canal, granting our ship access to the open ocean. Following that path, we arrived at Melmond, a city ravaged by a local vampire who's allegedly at the heart of the Earth's decay, blocking the flow of power from the Cave of Earth, causing the soil to go sterile and the plants to rot. We now know where we must head in order to restore the Earth Crystal, the first of the 4 elemental gems which must be brought back to light for the planet's restoration. We ventured into the depths of the Cavern of Earth, which turned out to be a natural labyrinth. Countless twisting and branching paths filled with monsters, bats, treasures, and dead ends. A perilous trek, but slowly we managed to find our way through to the end, where we encountered the vampire behind the ravaging of the land. Alas, slaying the vile fiend did not bring an end to the Earth's decay. However, we did acquire a valuable ruby and discovered the vampire had been guarding a stone tablet from which evil energy emanated. It appears we've happened upon a dead end and must solve how to quell the evil energy in order to truly bring peace back to this land. Today's quest took us to the Giant's Cave, where we proffered the Star Ruby in exchange for passage through the cave. Within the cavern, I decided to make a point about bad decision-making by deliberately attacking injured wolves despite Azure's request to leave them to him, while the rest of us slay the healthy ones with ease using our blades. Perhaps now that the consequences of questionable tactics have hit him a bit more personally, he'll start making some more wise decisions himself, such as relinquishing the lead position of our formation. Only time will tell if my actions will bear fruit, but for now we press onward to meet Sada to the south, seeking his wisdom now that we've come to a dead end in our quest. Sada informed us that the vampire was a mere minion of the sinister powers lying deeper within the Earth Cave's lower levels. Wielding the Earth Rod gifted unto us by the Great Sage, we delved beyond the stone slab and entered the deepest levels of the cave. The lower we went, the stronger the stench of death filled our lungs, and the more decayed the earth grew, the cavern walls sometimes looking as though they could collapse under their own weight at any moment, like the decrepit foundation of an elderly man supporting himself with a meager cane. At the heart of all this rot, we encountered Lich, the Earth Fiend, the most formidable foe we've faced yet. Nevertheless, we stood triumphant, and with our victory the light has returned to the Earth Crystal. Yet with this victory also came the realization that our journey, despite the tribulations we've already overcome, has only just begun. We arrived at the town of Crescent Lake, a city occupied by shopkeepers, a woman and her husband who sleeps in cemeteries, and 12 old people, one of whom turned out to be Lucan, the man who wrote the prophecy foretelling the Warriors of Light. We spoke with the Circle of Sages and learned much about the crystals, the fiends who seek to use the power of the crystals for nefarious deeds, and that the Fiend of Fire has been stirred awake centuries sooner than predicted due to our battle with Lich. In learning this information, we also acquired a canoe to reach Mount Gold to combat the Fire Fiend. Completely ignoring the pleas of the sages, our leader decided instead, after getting us lost in the river maze despite following a map, to take us further north to the completely unrelated ice cave. Along the way, talking of the Levistone, an item that he insisted has to have relevance because some random individual in a town mentioned it at some point. I do recall that item coming up when searching a town for information, but considering the person just blurted that out of nowhere when we were asking for information about the Earth Crystal and the vampire, it would stand to reason that person was nothing more than a raving lunatic. Furthermore, even if the Levistone were somewhere for us to find, there was nothing to suggest it would be in this area. Yet inexplicably it seemed to be Azure's motivation for leading us to the completely wrong dungeon, despite my outcries against ignoring the plight of the people for a random adventure. Against all odds, we found the Levistone inside the Cavern of Ice. I have no idea how Azure keeps making these insane predictions with zero information. For all we knew, the stone could have been inside a tomb somewhere deep underground, or at the bottom of the ocean, or even just at a pawn shop or in a forest or desert or mountain range. Using that, we were able to unearth an airship that had been buried underneath the sands of the Ryukon Desert, which Azure promptly damaged the hull of by demonstrating where it can't land. Having acquired an airship by means of finding the Levistone by what I can only assume to be unprecedented fate, we finally had an exceptional tool capable of transporting us to Mount Gold without concerns of getting lost along the complex river system north of Crescent. Utilizing this valuable acquisition, our leader took us to the northern continent, continuing to outright ignore the pleas of the sages who asked that we purge the land of the vile fiend of fire, instead wandering randomly in hopes of finding any bit of probably useless information we could, including learning of a mysterious tower nobody can enter, a brigand who sold a ferry to a caravan, and a broom reluctant about chores. If there's one good thing that came out of getting completely sidetracked from our crucial quest to save the world, however, it's that we finally unloaded old equipment. I can't begin to express how much extra work it's been lugging around all that extra equipment in our packs, especially when Azure and Jags insisted that myself and Roach do all the heavy carrying. Nonetheless, that's a task we could have easily completed back at Crescent ere venturing forth to slay the Fiend of Fire. Taking us further off course, Azure decided it best to undertake some kind of challenge we learned from a random villager instead of pursuing our actual goal, the directions of which led us to an archipelago occupied by dragons, where we met Bahamut, fabled king of the dragons, to whom Azure's manners were utterly appalling.
I'm the Dragon King.
The way he burst into laughter when Bahamut introduced himself struck the rest of us with terror that the regal beast may strike us down for our impertinence. Instead, he asked that we set forth on a quest to retrieve proof of our courage, so we headed northeast to the Citadel of Trials. Trekking vast forests and deadly swamps, we arrived at the Citadel of Trials, a maze of teleportation panels overrun by an assortment of monsters stronger than any we've seen thus far, including a powerful dragon zombie guarding a rat's tail. Azure insisted its significance was indicated by a jingle, but since the rest of us heard nothing, we disregarded that peculiar statement and returned to our airship under the much more logical explanation that a dragon said the proof could take pretty much any form. Presenting the tale to Bahamut, the Dragon King acknowledged our courage and bestowed unto us power beyond our wildest imaginations, making us more prepared than ever to restore the light to the crystals, if only that noble goal were still on Azure's mind. After putting it off to go on other adventures, we finally set foot inside Mount Glug, a volcano filled with bubbling lava and hordes of beasts such as blazing elementals, ravenous worms, and ferocious hydras. Navigating the smoldering maze, we discovered several treasures, many of which may have been useful had we come here when we were asked to do so, but now is mostly junk equipment we'll likely be selling at the shop, or forced to carry in our surprisingly large and durable packs. Wading into the depths through pools of lava, we finally reached the Fire Crystal, where Merilith, Fiend of Fire, awaited our arrival to thank us with death for awakening her. 'Twas a bit peculiar how she cut herself off during her introduction, merely mouthing the last few syllables of her speech instead of articulating the words, but I believe she threatened that we'll burn on Belfer. Whatever that means. No matter, for the fiend was slain and the second crystal was restored. 2 down, 2 to go. Our quest is halfway complete, so long as we don't wind up distracted once more. I'm not sure what weirds me out more, when Azure refers to himself in the third person during battle, or when he refers to my healing the party in the first person as if it's he who's casting the white magic that keeps us going during the long treks along raging rivers and through thick forests. Our journey found us at the neat city of Onrak on the northwestern continent, where we met some very interesting people with a strange fascination with legs, to which Azure exclaimed his love for his poofy pants. That aside, it was an educational visit. We learned where the caravan holding the ferry is located, in addition to discovering a potential use for the Oxy Ale should the ferry manage to acquire us some at the spring in Gaia. Having heard rumors of a sunken shrine allegedly filled with riches and possibly occupied by mermaids, we completely disregarded all of that and instead headed further north to investigate a waterfall to where a man named Copy reportedly saw a shining object fall from the sky. After killing a crocodile with Jesus powers, we arrived at Waterfall Cavern, where Azure's incessant ramblings suggested he's visited in the past, but alas, he no longer remembered the layout, nor could he recall the weakness of the territorial golems living there, so we were left to wander aimlessly while mowing down hordes of pitiful monsters. The exploration was mostly uneventful, although I'm still trying to make sense of when Azure asked me what it felt like to take 92 damage. I haven't the foggiest inkling of what that could mean. In the deepest chamber, we found several treasure chests and a metallic golem who gifted unto us a mysterious cube. With that mission complete, we proceeded onward to the caravan, where we liberated the kidnapped ferry. Azure then articulated what I could only assume was some kind of bartering code, for when he referred to the GBA version onward, the merchant presented us with a variety of unique potions we couldn't resist. Returning to Gaia, we released the ferry and acquired Oxy Ale. Utilizing that and the barrel submarine back in Onrak, we should be able to investigate the underwater shrine. Our day began like any other, not doing what we're supposed to be doing. At least this time the distractions were deliberately productive, unlike the usual case of Azure's ramblings and incoherent detours happening to be useful by sheer coincidence against all probability. We revisited some towns we'd previously saved, and from them expanded our arsenal of magic, making us better prepared for our dive into the depths of the sea, where a mysterious woman tasked us with saving mermaids. On the way down, we saw some enormous bubbles, a brief distraction from the otherwise agonizing experience of 4 grown men cramming themselves inside a barrel. Roach's heavy armor grinding against the rest of us didn't help with that, nor did our sweaty stenches with no ventilation. Those inns really could do with installing baths. Even underwater, Asher refused to cease his constant talking, although there was some relief to be had in his voice being reduced to a gargled mess of bubbles. This allowed for a level of silence I had forgotten thanks to this quest, so was sure to appreciate it while I could, for no doubt we'd be once more subjected to the full force of his endless chatting soon as we returned to the surface. It did, however, leave me wondering if the entity to whom he speaks could understand him more clearly than the rest of us as we explored the sunken shrine. Within the deepest chambers, we located the water crystal guarded by the fiend Kraken. Just as with those before him, we defeated the vile monster and restored light to the 3rd crystal. Only one to go, although I suspect we may be in Onrak for some time. Oxy Ale may have allowed us to breathe underwater, but otherwise the useful item didn't protect us at all from the elements. I suspect it'll take at least 3 days for Azure's poofy pants to be relieved of all the water they absorbed, so in the meantime we'll be retiring to the local inn. Perhaps I'll submit a request for bath installation while we're here. After our passage across a bridge was barred by a scholar, we took the Rosetta Stone discovered in the sunken ship to Dr. Un back in Melmond, the city we once liberated from a villainous vampire and the Earth Fiend Lich. Identifying him by the unique flavor of Sprite he carried with him at all times, it didn't take us long to find the man we sought hanging out in the graveyard. With him as an interpreter of the ancient tablet's mysterious knowledge, we were somehow able to learn an entirely new language within mere seconds. We are now able to visit the final town on the planet to collect more information and hopefully learn the location of the final crystal. From the Lufenians we learned much, of a castle in the sky and how the Mirage Tower is linked to it, confirming the tower in the desert must in fact exist. Not only that, but the Wind Fiend allegedly resides within that castle, meaning we must ascend the Mirage Tower and gain access to the Sky Castle in order to complete our mission. We also heard rumors that the four fiends may be servants of a higher power, and of warriors who were sent to confirm this information. Alas, nothing ever came of that quest, so we're left wondering if there may be more to our own journey than we originally anticipated. Entering the Mirage Tower, Azure's ridiculous placement at the front of our lineup finally paid off. I never thought I'd say that, but his ribbon protected him from the stares of the Gorgons, who were so intrigued by wanting to see what secrets hide underneath his hat. Their petrifying gazes were drawn away from the rest of us, allowing us to make quick work of enemies that could have otherwise been disastrous to fight. We successfully climbed Mirage Tower, and using the warp cube previously acquired, ascended into the flying fortress where Tiamat awaits. I used attack magic today. It's been so long I almost forgot I was a red mage. Seriously, I should have just focused my schooling strictly on perfecting white magic, but at the time the versatility of a red mage just seemed so useful. A bright-eyed student with high aspirations, I spent my Wizard Academy days envisioning how beneficial my diverse pool of talents would one day prove to a band of adventurers, only to now find myself at the mercy of a leader who insists on limiting my potential to swinging a sword and occasionally casting restorative spells during periods of rest. Granted, the strategy is working, it oftentimes leaves me feeling as though I made a mistake in the path I chose for my life. Along our climb through the fortress, we found an observation deck from which we witnessed the most breathtaking sight I ever could have imagined. A panoramic view of the entire planet from high above the clouds. My pen cannot find the words to genuinely describe the splendor we witnessed, but more importantly, we observed a convergence of energy flowing from the elemental altars, almost as if the crystals themselves are directing us towards where we must go next. However, first we needed to finish our business here and restore the final crystal to its former glory. Navigating a perplexing, reality-warping labyrinth, we arrived at the top floor, where the Crystal of Wind awaited restoration, guarded by the vicious hydra known as Tiamat, the Wind Fiend. Unfortunately for her, all those heads constituted a prime target for biological warfare, so after taking some heavy damage from devastating lightning breath, Azure and Jags suffocated the mighty beast with toxic gas, overwhelming and slaying her with minimal effort. With that victory, the final crystal is restored, and our heroic quest nears its end. The fiends defeated and the crystals restored. The end of our long quest is upon us. Alas, as we learned while in the Sky Fortress, the energy from the crystals is gathering at a single point on the planet, which we were somehow able to see entirely from high above despite its spherical shape. Ignoring that paradox, we delivered adamantites to the dwarven blacksmith, who created a fine sword for Roach. After arming him with a blade that Azure weirdly assured isn't the strongest weapon we'll be finding in the game, as he likes to strangely refer to our perilous journey, we visited stores across the globe to spend our hard-earned gil on new magic spells. Surely these acquisitions will serve us well as we set off for the final battle at the Chaos Shrine. If only our so-called leader gave a damn about the well-being of our planet. Instead of putting an end to the destruction that has cost lives and ravaged the planet in turmoil and decay, he led us to a completely unrelated location that in no way furthers our noble goal. He even actively referred to it as a bonus, as in something we could no doubt worry about exploring to satiate our wanderlust after fulfilling Lucan's prophecy. Yet instead, he insisted upon dragging us into the depths of the Earthgift Shrine, risking our lives and jeopardizing all who await the planet's restoration from darkness's sinister hold. Had that been the worst of it, I could chalk it up to his typical nonsense. Which I was about to, but just as we were returning to the airship, that lunatic forcefully dragged us back into the cave 3 more times. Had I predicted these ridiculous detours imposed by our own leader, I would have robbed the others of the crystals in their sleep before we even reached Cornelia, and set off on the quest on my own to ensure its timely success. Indubitably, the world would be cleansed of the darkness by now had I done that, but instead I'm stuck with a black mage who I swear must be conniving with our enemies at this point, trying to sabotage our efforts at every turn while delaying progress to allow the damage to spread widely as possible before we reach the end. It's the only logical explanation I can devise at this point. Azure glared angrily at me when I cast my healing magic upon him, but it wasn't my fault I was able to chant an entire Kiraga incantation faster than he could drink a lousy giant's tonic. Maybe if he didn't spend so much time chatting with the unknown entity, his mouth would have been more readily available to consume his potion faster. Far as I'm concerned though, he deserved it for dragging us into that wretched dungeon in the first place, pitting us up against deadly adversaries who not only wielded powers far superior to the fiends, but inexplicably bore striking resemblance to our arch-enemies. As if these beasts constituted another band of fiends contained within this once sealed dungeon, secretly growing in power while awaiting an opportunity to be unleashed onto the world. Just considering that possibility made me wonder if our battle will ever truly be over, or if other evils will rear their ugly heads even after we've purged the world of the darkness we set out to thwart. Whatever the case, such powerful creatures shouldn't be left alone, and I suppose slaying them is our responsibility, for 'twas our actions which inadvertently dispelled their confinement in the first place. I can only pray that these constant detours do not result in consequences caused by not hastily addressing the energy flowing into the Chaos Shrine. Had you wagered all your gil against mine that such words would ever pass Azure's lips, I'd have been stricken both poor and in debt for the remainder of my days. For him to have begun the day by declaring he'll stop shirking in our duties, I demanded Roach use his sword to confirm this wasn't a dream, for only a blade so mighty would be able to confirm that such an outlandish scenario is anything more. Alas, one should never overestimate the intelligence of a warrior, for now I find myself bleeding profusely as we set sail back to the Chaos Shrine because he assumed I meant he strike with full force. Should this wound prove a fatal detriment to our noble quest, then I fear it is I who was ultimately most foolish for inadvertently dooming us all, even more so than our self-proclaimed leader. Thankfully, it is also I who is the party's healer, so these injuries shouldn't be too problematic. Entering the Chaos Shrine, we immediately saw a suspicious individual walk through a secret passage, which we promptly ignored, Azure's usual prescience proposing that the robed man was of no consequence to our quest. Normally I would accuse him of returning right back to his habit of disregarding our priorities by ignoring an obvious hint to progress, but based on his track record of strangely knowing things he shouldn't, I let it slide in hopes that he did indeed know what he was doing. Guidance which not only led us to encounter those heroes who came before us only to meet an unfortunate end by some wicked transformation magic, but also plunged us thousands of years into the past, where it would seem the fiends were delivering the energy absorbed by the crystals. With the end of our journey in sight, we conjured the portal and stepped into the past to put an end to this madness once and for all. Fighting our way through the fiercest monsters yet, and playing a lute to open a secret passageway that Azure for some reason knew how to play flawlessly despite not being a bard. Even he himself didn't seem to quite understand how he pulled it off. We were suddenly ambushed inexplicably by Lich, Fiend of Earth. A foe we had already slain once before, but now stood before us yet again. Could this be due to us traveling back in time? Or is the energy that was being transferred from the crystals responsible for the Fiend's revival? We've already been thrown for a loop with all we've learned and experienced since arriving at the Chaos Shrine, so at this point I can only pray we'll find answers sooner rather than later, in addition to a solution to a problem that has escalated to a level far greater than anything we could have possibly fathomed at the outset of our journey. P.S. We also fought Merilith again. We delved deeper into the Chaos Shrine of the past, slaying all manner of beastly creature that stood in our way. Once more facing off against Kraken, and finding a mighty sword which we handed to Azure, the rest of us already armed with weapons more than strong enough to get by. We then headed to where we'd face Tiamat, but were ambushed by a group of vampires in what may have been the first failure of Azure's prescience throughout our entire quest. It mattered not, however, for such feeble creatures have long since been beneath us, so they, like everything else, were slain with ease, as was the once mighty Fiend of Wind. At the center of an ominously designed room, we were shocked to find Garland, the fiendish disgrace we knocked down at the beginning of our quest. He explained how he was thrust into the past by the four fiends, so that he could then send the four fiends into the future for them to then thrust him into the past when he's killed, creating an endless loop of events. I haven't the foggiest idea of what he could possibly hope to accomplish by doing this, nor do I even understand how such a paradox was ever set into motion, but whatever sinister goal he hopes to accomplish, we stood strong to stop him. Which technically we already had, since the fiends of the past were dead in the other rooms, meaning Garland's plot had already been thwarted before this final battle even began. Right before our eyes, Garland transformed into the embodiment of chaos, but even that wasn't enough to fend off our heroic might. After a lengthy battle with a couple close calls, we successfully defeated the villain who started it all in order to end it all, severing the time loop Garland hoped to create and restoring the elements to the world as they were meant to be. And thus, we returned to our own world, to a world where our heroic quest never transpired. For by defeating the evil that set the events into motion, we were never summoned to set out on our quest. That is, until a fateful day, when we received word that Princess Sarah of Cornelia had been kidnapped by a defective knight named Garland, and we set out once more to rescue her from his vile clutches. Only this time, that is where our story would end. Until Azure drags us into those other deadly dungeons, risking our lives for no good reason other than the thrills. Today, we finally arrived in Cornelia, having been summoned by the king to rescue Princess Sarah from a defected knight named Garland. A noble mission which we undertook not only to rescue the kingdom's princess, but also to tie up the loose ends of the time loop. Defeating Garland once more, only this time there would be no fiends to send him back into the past, ending his evil plot once and for all. The battle was much easier this time, Garland falling to a single flare spell, but little did we suspect that breaking the time loop altered more than just the diabolical scheme of chaos. It also created a butterfly effect that somehow resulted in Garland being accompanied by a bipedal robot of incredibly destructive power. This war mech awoke in response to Garland's defeat, and had it been present during our first quest to save Princess Sarah, surely we never would have survived to restore the crystals. Against our extensive experience, however, not even such a mighty robot stood a chance against Roach's legendary blade. At long last, our journey to save the world has truly come to an end. The world was now at peace, the elements balanced. However, this was not the end of our adventure, for there were still more thrills to be had and treasures to be found. Starting with Whisperwind Cove, located near the ice cavern where we once discovered the ancient Levistone. I have no idea what Azure meant by us skipping Final Fantasy V for now, but nonetheless it does seem a bit peculiar that we'd head first to the dungeon unlocked by defeating Tiamat, rather than visiting that which was unsealed by Kraken's demise. Judging from cosmic coincidence, monsters have always seemed to grow stronger in compliance with the order of our quest's events, so let us hope we are properly prepared to take on monsters that, by that logic, will be stronger than those in the dungeon once guarded by the Water Fiend. What is this place? Just in the first 3 floors alone, we went from a flooded cove, to a fortress in the sky, to a desert town occupied by robots. Even having just experienced the breaking of a time paradox triggered by the embodiment of chaos, I still can't begin to wrap my head around this perplexing place. Is this, like the war mech under Garland's employ, a direct result of Chaos's actions? Did the time loop generate a distortion governed by chaotic energy so wild they manifested into this impossible abomination of a labyrinth? If I think about it too extensively, my distracted thoughts may lead to catastrophic results for our party, so I'll have to put a pin in this mystery for now, but rest assured I'll be spending many a night pondering the existence of Whisperwind Cove when at last our adventuring is over and we're able to all return home. We repaired a damaged robot, listened to the wishes of the dead, and took a swim through lava until we encountered the first truly threatening beast in this cave, a snorting demon named Typhon. He seemed formidable, but thanks to our strategy of empowering Roach so he can stab things, we succeeded with ease. Beyond that, we passed through a cave of dwarves who needed our help because they can't talk to each other to get the things they need, a village of fairies both kind and evil, helped an elderly man retrieve his giant beavers, passed through a cursed castle, and traversed a hovering island to reach the next powerful foe this cove had to offer, a purple octopus suffering from an identity crisis which fell like the rest to our usual strategy. Strange though it were for such a location to exist, we were relieved to find an inn within the depths of this lengthy dungeon. We've been through a lot with no end in sight, so having an opportunity to rest was welcome. It's strange how Azure seemed as if he were expecting this town to appear, but he's always been an oddball, so I've learned to ignore him. Especially when he starts spouting nonsense, such as how he conducted a practice run of this dungeon prior to our visit, which is impossible. Ever since the start of our journey, we've all been traveling side by side. There's no point when he could have slipped off to do such a thing, especially since he would have returned exhausted and of greater experience, which would have blatantly indicated he'd been up to something. Since no such thing ever resulted from a so-called surveillance, I'll chalk that up to another one of his incoherent ramblings. Perhaps he was just trying to impress the unidentified entity to whom he speaks. We pressed onward, and it wasn't long until we happened upon a congregation of wizards, but before we could finish our business there, Azure tripped through a door and landed us in the bubbling broth of a volcanic cavern.
I didn't want to do that.
I kept telling him to pay attention to where he was going, but he couldn't take his admiring eyes off the poofy pants of his brethren. Next thing he knew, he was plummeting down a pit, dragging the rest of us along for the ride. With all his whining about it, I found it curious that he didn't ask me to try casting the teleport spell to transport us back up to the previous floor, but this dungeon is such a distortion of reality, maybe that was for the best. As for making that decision myself, I find it too amusing when he suffers due to his own incompetence. We battled a spectral train that looked oddly suplexable, lifting a curse on people who for some reason live a mile below the surface where there's enough brilliant sunlight for fields and flowers to grow. Then we ventured through more caves, eventually arriving at another town, this one occupied entirely by children playing hide and seek. One boy asked for our assistance finding another, and with nothing better to do we chose to participate, wandering aimlessly through a maze of wormholes until we both found the sought child and our way back to where we started. This opened the staircase to our final destination at last. The battle with Death Gaze was difficult. Azure and I struggled to stay on our feet because our so-called leader still refuses to optimize our formation. Had Roach and Jags been protecting us as they should have been, I could have had more time to set up the entire party with Proterra, while Azure's healing could have better kept pace with our enemy's damage output. Thankfully, we're nothing if not tenacious. That, combined with our pockets that are somehow able to carry hundreds of healing items and enchanted pieces of equipment, we managed to stand triumphant once we were able to gather our bearings. With that, we finally put Whisperwind Cove behind us. Oh yeah, we have a boat! Once more utilizing Oxyale, we sailed to Lifespring Grotto, an underwater realm where we met Dark Bahamut, who challenged us with a test of worthiness. I didn't much appreciate Azure swiping my journal without permission to jot down basic notes the four of us could have easily memorized, but perhaps more interesting was how Bahamut patiently let this happen before proceeding to explain his trial. Not that it mattered, as the test just boiled down to a mindless massacre of dragons until those we were tasked to defeat had been slain, many of which were lives that could have been spared had it not been for illusionary magic disguising them all with red scales, turning the test into a battle of attrition quite unlike that which we once undertook by decree of Light Bahamut. With a foreboding warning, Dark Bahamut opened the path forward. The road deeper led to a city of mermaids, where we encountered a human also possessing of oxyale, and who sought Excalibur. Has the work of the blacksmith who forged it for us spread so far so quickly that... Wait, that doesn't make any sense! When we defeated Chaos, it was as if our quest had never happened. Nobody had any memories of our exploits because our journey thus ended following the defeat of Garland and the rescue of Princess Sarah. Thus, Excalibur was never forged in this new timeline we created. So how did this man learn of its existence? Whatever. We could have just given him the sword since we're no longer using it, but he attacked us so aggressively without provocation, we had no choice but to defend ourselves and put him down like all who dare stand against our might. Beyond those noteworthy floors, this cave has thus far been uneventful. Sure, Azure almost suffered divine punishment for our party formation, and we walked across a magical bridge in the sky which led to a vast library brimming with enthusiastic scholars, but the hordes of powerless monsters are beginning to wear on all of our nerves, especially when the treasures we're finding as rewards for our efforts are proving to be mostly useless to us. Hopefully that will change as we delve deeper, or at least the foes standing in our way will begin to prove more worthy of our time. We set up camp in the sanctity of the library, then set out the next day, resuming our quest through Lifespring Grotto, where we continued to be attacked by monsters so feeble, battles against them were as if nothing more than a flash of white, allowing us smooth, unimpeded passage until suddenly we stumbled upon a cult of dancers. They seemed to be celebrating something, but refused to acknowledge our presence, so we were unable to gather any information. We did our best to dance around their own dancing, trying to make our way deeper into the dungeon without interfering with their ritual. As expected, that journey deeper underground led us to a walkway in the sky. After that nonsense, we chugged a bunch of potions, then created a save. I still am unable to decipher the meaning of this, but it's something Azure announces on a regular basis. I've questioned Roach and Jags about it, but they're as perplexed as I, and when I tried to ask Azure, he just regarded me as if insane for not understanding, then pressed onward to whatever ridiculous thing he was dragging us into at the time. Just up ahead were by far the mightiest foes we've thus far faced in the form of a robot and a dragon. Both were fierce monsters to slay, but comparing them there was no contest that the machine was mightier than the beast. Through attrition and healing, we managed to miraculously pull through some close calls and claimed the ultimate treasures of the final of the 4 sealed dungeons.
What you're seeing right now is actually pre-recorded footage.
Pre-recorded footage? Azure never told me he was also keeping a logbook of our journey. I can't even begin to try understanding what he means by it being pre-recorded, but perhaps if I later compare his notes with my own, I'll find some semblance of answers to some of the burning questions I've had in regards to his peculiar levels of prescience, and perhaps even the identity of the entity to whom he frequently speaks. But I digress. For the last 2 months, we believed our journey to have come to an end. We had saved the world, conquered the sealed labyrinths, and returned home after the arduous quest. That is until the other day, when Azure arrived at my door, along with Roach and Jags, going on about a door to a labyrinth of time he accidentally stumbled upon. Despite being driven insane by our leader throughout the extent of our previous journey, I have to admit the call to adventure was enticing, so I packed my gear and we once again set out. Entering the labyrinth, we met a cloaked man who spoke of the Labyrinth of Time, home to an entity known as the Master of Time, and explained we'll be tasked with a series of puzzles should we choose to venture forth. I assume the ultimate goal is to meet this so-called Master of Time, and considering our quest to stop Garland ended by breaking a time loop he hoped to instigate, perhaps it would be in our best interest to seek out this so-called Master. As instructed, we engaged in a series of puzzles divided between the labyrinth's many floors. The various puzzles involved identifying fairy dance patterns, divining for a specific treasure chest, pushing blocks into designated slots while avoiding golems out to destroy them, navigating a cave system filled with dragons, precisely following a light trail, using candles to illuminate the darkness, digging to unearth a buried key, parade formation memorization, counting bats, bat herding, lighting a chamber of enchanted candelabras, lighting more candles in accordance to ancient tablets, spotting shape-shifting phantoms, crossing a brittle bridge hanging above a magma pool, avoiding lightning bolts, shoving through a crowd of robots, pressing switches to somehow remove giant rocks that just as mysteriously reappeared, and finally calculating a precise budget to purchase flowers from the most oddly dressed merchants I've ever seen. The puzzles themselves weren't particularly difficult, most proving more of a minor inconvenience than challenges requiring serious thought to solve, but what's far more perplexing is what the man said at the entrance. He spoke of us needing to sacrifice our powers to hold off an encroaching miasma, but we have traversed 18 floors and thus far seen no sign of such a threat. Which may be for the best, because we haven't yet even discovered how to give our strength to fend it off should it be necessary. Perhaps that is just another of the labyrinth's mysteries of which we must be wary as we delve deeper. For once, Azure and I agree on something. Breaking out our tents in the middle of a dungeon really is the worst. Not only is it far more difficult to get comfortable on the cold, hard ground of stone or marble than having soft grass to soften the base of the tent, but there are so many monsters infesting every step that we need to put extra effort into defensive procedures so we are not ambushed in our sleep. Unfortunately, sometimes a dungeon's size requires more than one day of exploration. Such is the case with this labyrinth of time. Continuing our exploration through the labyrinth, we were challenged with more puzzling chambers. To summarize them in another page-long sentence that is by far the ugliest thing in my journal, we navigated an intricate switch maze, mimicked an enchanted mirror, performed a marching procedure alongside soldiers, arranged statues so they faced those identical to themselves, conducted music, cleared a path of obstacles for a robot, and slayed specific dragons. The next two areas were difficult as the rest, but were nothing worth writing about because they merely combined elements of earlier floors in challenging ways, blending previous trials together so that they complemented each other to make a whole. After conquering those floors, we proceeded to wreck war mechs, arranged more statues but with monsters that disappeared alongside them when the corresponding statues were situated to face their twin, then wrapped things up with another assortment of previous puzzles. With that, it would appear we have completed all the floors of the Labyrinth of Time. I'm still perplexed as to the total absence of the miasma or the requirement of sacrificing our abilities as mentioned when we first arrived, but perhaps we are yet to learn the meaning of that riddle, or perhaps those were simply lies to scare away those who lack the wit and bravery to overcome this dungeon's many trials. I can only hope there are answers to be had. I'm kept up at night enough trying to wrap my head around the time paradox that saved the world from chaos. The last thing I need is to be mentally assaulted by yet another unanswered question. We happened upon a mystical orb that asked us to sacrifice our abilities in order to proceed and solve the puzzles ahead, but whoever created this dungeon should have probably hired an interior decorator, or at least a consultant with the competence of a young child, because it was located at the end of our quest after all the rooms had already been cleared. Therefore, we had no puzzles to solve, no challenges to overcome, and no need to sacrifice our abilities in order to advance further. I wonder if the miasma we were warned of was similarly flawed. In the final chamber, we encountered a being who referred to itself as the Lord of Time, and it would appear that there was a grave misunderstanding. This all-powerful entity seemed under the impression that we were here seeking its power, which couldn't be further from the truth. We are simply a group of heroes who stumbled upon this place by total accident and decided to venture forth to satisfy the itch for adventure that's been stagnant since we saved the world from chaos and triumphed over the sealed dungeons that were once barricaded by the ambient powers of the Four Fiends. Regardless, the godly creature who Azure named Chronodia attacked, and we, the Warriors of Light, once more steeled ourselves for battle. Thus began our greatest battle yet. The Lord of Time itself appeared to be some sort of twisted, freakish conglomeration of all of our greatest foes, with access to the mightiest of black magic, monster skills, and even a power unlike any we've ever faced in which the laws of reality were warped to prevent us from performing certain actions. However, Azure came strangely prepared with weapons and armor with quality far surpassing anything we've ever seen. I can't even begin to imagine where he found these items, especially since some were in multiple quantities. Regardless of how it was possible, 'twas a good thing he somehow acquired those invaluable tools, For with them we were able to erect virtually impenetrable defenses against Crenodia's relentless onslaught of magic and punches, providing us with openings we needed to strike it down with newly acquired swords, proving once more our worthiness as the saviors of the world by defeating the ultimate foe. Thus, our journey came to an end. The world is at peace, so I may at long last hang up my sword and my pen until the next grand adventure.